All right. Hello. Hello. I am Shelby McQueenie on the Kelly Brown team. I am here today with Tyler Anderson, who will be speaking here shortly. We are chatting all about purchasing investment properties. This is a 4-part series. Today is part 3, managing properties, helpful hints to manage properties successfully. Tyler Anderson is a very successful mortgage lender as well as a real estate investor. He's been investing in real estate for over 20 years and has a very reputable and diverse portfolio of rental properties that includes 60 buildings and over 100 units across the Twin Cities, Duluth, and Superior, Wisconsin areas. This series today is all about how to successfully manage properties. Tyler, I know you shared with me when you first got into renting properties, you managed them on your own time, just trying to figure out, how to manage them properly and the costs associated with that. Where, of course, now today you are hiring that out with different property managers. So we're very excited to hear about that and have you dive in. But before we do, I want you guys to add to your calendar our final episode, which is our part 4 series. It's to your calendar on Thursday, February 3rd at noon. And that will be how to maximize value and minimize issues. So we will be doing a Q&A session after this. So please jot down your questions then. And then we will kind of review that then. So, all right, let's get started.
Okay. Well, thanks, Shelby. Always fun doing these things. I love talking about real estate. It's my passion, investing in real estate. First of all, I want to say I'm not a good property manager. So I'll put that right out there. I managed my properties up until last year. And it got to a point where I was being lazy. It's difficult when you have kids and when you have a full-time job and a spouse that works really hard. You get to a point where you have too many properties and you can't do it effectively. I was getting really lazy. I wasn't increasing rents because I didn't want to deal with doing showings. So I just didn't feel like I was doing justice, because real estate investing is really a business and you need to do it accordingly. So I kind of made the switch for a couple of reasons. I self-managed, but I just didn't have the time to do it effectively. Second reason was as you remember, with the eviction moratorium, it just really got complicated trying to navigate working with Minnesota Rent Help with people who needed assistance. I didn't have time to do that. And the other reason really was trying to find good handymen and contractors. That was very difficult to do, especially in this market when the labor shortage is so tight. But I still actively manage my management company. So I'm still very active. So I still am very involved with the process of it. And property management is probably one of the most important things with investing in real estate, because a good property manager, a good management can make an average property good and a good property great. And bad management can make an excellent property terrible. If you're not raising rents, if you're letting the property get deteriorated, things like that. So property management is vital, and choosing a good property manager is also very important. I've been through a couple different property management companies that weren't good. So my properties in Duluth and Superior, I have a lot of units up there, and the property management company I started with was doing well in the beginning, and then I don't know what happened. Every one of my properties seemed to have repairs on it every single month, which I know is not accurate. They let 2 of my properties get condemned because they didn't do city work on them. And so I switched to a reputable management company, and literally my income has gone up $6,000 to $8,000 a month just by having a good management company. So that just goes to show how effective property management can be to maximize your investments. But I do put a caveat on there that I do think everybody should start managing their first properties on their own. It doesn't take a lot of effort if you only have a couple. The reason I say that is because you really learn how the process works. You know how to advertise. You know kind of what tenants expect, and doing that allows you to better manage the management company. So if you just start off right away and have a manager, you don't know if they're doing a good job because you really don't have experience on it. So I do think that managing on your own for those first couple properties are important. And the property management process starts, at least for me, right when I make an offer. And so what I do is any offer that I make on a property, I have my property manager come do the showings with me, because I want the management company to to sign off on it for me. I want that to get their blessing because they're going to be managing it. So they need to look for, is it a good layout? Is it a good location? Obviously, if there's deferred maintenance. So the process starts for me right in the beginning there. And the other thing I do with my management company is I do a market rent analysis with them. And I want to verify that the rents are going to be accurate. It's just because there's a lease on the property for $1,000 a month doesn't mean that's the market rent. You could have found the one person that's paying $1,000 and the market rent's maybe 800. Or if you're looking at a property that rents 1,000 and maybe it's a landlord that's owned a property for 20 years, and which is very common and never wanted to raise rates, maybe there's room to increase it. So I always work with my management company on looking at Craigslist for comparables, looking at Zillow, looking at Rentometer, talking to other property management companies. So I think it's very important to, in the beginning, to really narrow in on what that rent's going to be. And I always try to gather leases and rent rolls on any offer that I have coming in, because just because a lease says something, you want to know when it ends, how the utilities are split. And the rent rolls will show who's paying on time. So you don't want to inherit a property that tenant hasn't paid in 6 months. So the rent rolls would be able to show you who's paying and what. Another thing I do when I'm looking at properties, I always get an inspection on the properties as well, because I need to know what deferred maintenance there are, what the upfront cost is going to be. So my property manager will look at the inspection report with me, kind of give me an idea of what the costs are going to be, give me an idea of what some of the deferred maintenance might be on those properties. And one of the things that I've learned to do over the years is to get a sewer inspection as well, because I purchased it 2 years ago, and the week after I purchased it, there was water backing up in the basement, and of course the seller didn't know anything about it, I'm sure. But we scoped the sewer, and there was tree roots growing into the sewer line. So I had to spend $5,000 to get rid of the roots and redo it. So getting a proper inspection is important to kind of set your expectations up for what the deferred maintenance is going to be. As far as advertising properties, one thing I always put in my purchase agreements as well is I want to be able to show the property before I close on it. So what I write into the purchase agreements when I'm purchasing a property is the seller has to allow me to do at least 2 showings prior to closing, because I want to minimize vacancy. And so, a property that's vacant, I want to make sure that I can advertise it up front, and so the day of closing, I can have it rented. And so that's typically the case is I get the property rented before I close on the property. So I think that's very important to minimize the vacancies. And as far as kind of how I advertise, the 2 I use the most are going to be Craigslist and Zillow. Those seem to be the easiest way to advertise for tenants. I put in an ad. It takes me less than 5 minutes to put an ad together on Craigslist and Zillow. You need to have good pictures. You need to have a good description. But between just using those 2 sites, I get as many inquiries as I probably need. And a lot of times, especially in hot areas like Northeast Minneapolis, I get too many and I have to really shut it off. But other ways to be successful in advertising is social media. Actually, Facebook Marketplace, I've heard has had some success. I know my property managers use Facebook. I haven't, but I know they're very successful at it. And Instagram, obviously, ways to kind of get tenants, potential tenants interested in your property. And the one thing I always do too, especially for my existing units, so if I have a duplex and one of the units are going to be vacating, I always ask the other tenant if they know anybody that would want to rent. And I do that for a couple of reasons. One is just it saves me time. I don't have to show the property. And number 2 is, part of the headache of having multifamily is having people that get along. And typically, if the tenants know each other, I have less issues, noise violations, tattling on each other, just less babysitting. So I always try to have the existing tenant find me another tenant, and it's been very successful for me as well. Couple of things is when you do showings. So once you get your advertising done and you have inquiries that are coming in, what I try to do is I try to pre-screen my tenants. Now, what I mean by that is I try to let the potential tenants know up front what my criteria is. So I tell them, okay, I have to have a 600 credit score, no evictions, no felonies. I do that because I don't want to waste my time showing a property to somebody that's not going to qualify. And that weeds out some people that that may not want to come to your property, so they're not going to qualify for it. And one thing when showing properties too is you need to make sure the property is clean and rent ready condition. I've made the mistake sometimes of showing properties that aren't clean, and that's the type of tenant that you're going to get. Is if it's a sloppy property, you're going to get a sloppy tenant. So I always try to make sure that my properties are in good shape, carpet's clean, painted, to make sure it's in good condition, because that's going to be representative of what type of tenant that you're going to get. And one other thing with regards to showings, I always try to do group showings. The reason for it is really twofold. Number one is just time. Nothing is more frustrating than setting up an individual showing with a tenant and they don't show up. I can't tell you how many times they've done that. And number two is doing group showings allow us for a sense of competition. So if you have 5 groups that are piled in at an open house, those tenants or potential tenants are going to have a sense of competition with each other. And I see that, I get an application, whoever gets it first, gets first crack at it. And I think that works sometimes as well. And next I want to talk about kind of the most important thing is the application process, how to screen tenants. One thing I always do is I always charge an application fee. A couple of reasons. One, it costs me money because it costs money to screen the tenants. And number two is you're not going to have tenants that are going to apply if they don't meet your criteria. So if they know they have to pay $35 to $50 for an application and they know that they have an eviction on their record, well, then they just wasted their own money. So those people don't typically apply if they know your standards. It's very important to take a comprehensive application on job history, income, assets, background checks. So screening is very important. One screening company that I've used is Rental History Reports. So that's one that will do background checks. They'll actually do landlord verifications. They'll do credit scoring. And so one of the couple of things I look for in the screening is I look for felonies. I will not rent to felons. And I say that, I put that with a caveat, because Minneapolis and St. Paul, there's certain things you can't deny people on felonies after a certain amount of time. So just kind of be aware of where you are. But my criteria is no felonies, and I've broken this before, and I've been burned every time. So anytime I kind of break my standards, I get burned. And funny story is this was a couple of years ago, and I had a tenant apply, and they had 3 theft felonies, I think they were, back 3 or 4 years ago. And stupid me, I had the property being vacated in January, which you never should do. So I just wanted to get it rented, and they gave me a sob story, and I was nice, and of course everything was fine for 3 months. And then I get a call from the police about 3 to 4 months later, and they say, well, we had to knock down your door, and you're not going to see your tenants for quite some time. I'm like, oh my God, what happened? And so what happened was they were stealing ATM machines. So what they would do is they would take those chain ropes, tie it to their car, and literally rip ATMs out of the cement. And so 2 months prior to that, the tenant came to my office and gave me 2 or 3 months of rent in all 20s. I'm like, I wonder where that came from. But yeah, so that was kind of the last time I've ever rented to a felon. I want to think better of people, but sometimes I just don't think they learn. And I've been burned, so I won't do it. Evictions, I won't rent to anybody that has an eviction. As if you've ever been a landlord, you know how hard it is to actually get to a point of an eviction. Landlords will try at all costs not to go down the eviction route because it's expensive. You have to hire a lawyer. It takes months. So most landlords will just let them leave. So if you have somebody that actually had to go through the eviction process, it means they're a terrible tenant. So I don't allow any evictions. I look for bankruptcies, judgments, and collections. And I do that kind of as a rule of, I don't really have any set standards, because I know some people just go through difficulties, and I'm very sympathetic to that. So, but just has to make sense, if there's some medical collections or stuff like that. And it depends on how long we go. It just depends on the overall picture. Same with credit score. I like to have about a 600 credit score standard. But again, if it's a bunch of medical collections, if they just have very young credit where it's just not established but not bad, I will make exceptions on the credit score. It just really depends on the overall picture. Now, Another thing you need to do with potential tenants is verify income. Landlords will typically ask for 2.5 to 3 times rent. So if the rent's $1,000 a month, most landlords will want to see income of 2,500 to 3,000 a month to let them in the property. So you want to collect your pay stubs, W-2s, whatever you need to do to validate that rent. And then lastly, is I always check with the landlords, previous landlords. I actually checked the last 2 landlords because it's been the case before where the tenant's so bad, the current landlord will lie to you and just say, oh, he's fine, just to get him out of the property. So I always check 2 landlords ago because they have no incentive to lie to you. So, I asked, did they pay their rent on time? Were there any noise complaints? Were there any police calls? Would you rent to them again? So just certain things you want to vet the current previous landlords about. And when selecting a tenant, you should be very cautious. You want to set your criteria and be consistent, because there's obviously a lot of fair housing issues, and you don't want to run into a situation where someone's going to claim discrimination. So what you want to do is you want to treat everybody the same, and you have your certain set of standards and you abide by it, just to keep yourself safe and not you don't want to get in trouble by the city for renting to one group of people and not the other. And the one thing that I always do before taking a house or a unit off the market is I always collect the security deposit, and I make sure that it is cashed. I've made the mistake before of collecting a check, or they tell you to wait to deposit it, and then I forgot about it. It came a week before closing. I'm like, oh my God, I tried to cash it and it bounced. And I tried to call the tenant and ask about it, and they were gone. So before you take a unit off the market, always make sure that you have a security deposit. If it's a check, cash the check to make sure that it's that there's money there. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the lease. Having a very strong lease is very important. So just a couple things. I'm not going to go over everything with the lease, but some of the things that I feel is important to discuss is number one is to make sure the lease is compliant and has all appropriate addendums. A lot of landlords will use 20-year-old leases. They'll use leases from other states. You want to make sure that your lease is up to date with current standards and has all the appropriate addendums on it. If there's a crime-free addendum, if there's a lead-based paint addendum, you need to make sure you have all of that. And I think Minnesota Multi-Housing has a good lease that you can use. Bigger Pockets does have leases in most states, so those are some good templates for you to use, but make sure you always have an up-to-date lease. Next is you want anybody that's over the age of 18 needs to be on the lease. That's very important. So if you have a 4-bedroom apartment, only one person's on the lease, do some digging there, because what I've found is that if there's someone living in the house and they're not in the lease, there's a good reason why they're not in the lease. They could be a criminal, a violent criminal, and that's not somebody you want to have living in the property. So you need to be very upfront with the people that are applying and telling them that every single person over 18 years old needs to be on the lease, and if not, it is going to be a reason for eviction. Because, like I said, if they don't disclose that they're on the lease, there's going to be a good reason why they're not. One thing with a security deposit, one thing that I always do is I always charge $100 more than the rent for the security deposit. And the reason I do that is I feel like a lot of the time people just say, take my security deposit for my last month's rent, and they don't pay you. It gives me an extra $100 or so to clean the property if needed. So that's one of the things that I do in my lease is I take the rent for the month and I add $100. So on the lease as well, you want to be very clear on what the fees are. Always make sure to have late fees in there. Minnesota will allow you to charge up to 8%. So I put 8%. Any other fees you need to disclose. Sometimes I have storage lockers in the basement, laundry, how that's done. And then when it comes to pets, you need to make sure you're very clear on what type of pets are allowed. Certain insurance companies don't allow certain pets in properties. And so you always want to make sure to charge a pet deposit and pet rent too. As most people are, they do expect to pay pet rent, typically between $25 and $35 a month per pet. And then, security deposit for the pet as well. You got to make sure that's in there, or sometimes just a separate pet addendum that you can use. You want to be very clear on who's responsible for where the tenants can call for repairs and maintenance. So you try to have a number put into the lease of who to call for any issues. Is certainly not going to be me. One of the things that I like to do is do the CenterPoint energy plan. So if there's anything wrong with the furnace, the appliance, the stuff like that, they don't call me. They call CenterPoint Service Plus plan directly, so it saves me some time. The utility splits are very important on a lease. You always want to itemize out who's responsible for what utilities, and never pay the utilities on a tenant's behalf when they can pay for them. I've seen on multiple occasions where it's a day like today where it's like 30 below out. So you go to the property, you're paying the heat, they have the window open, and it's 80 degrees in there. So if the tenant is not responsible for the utilities, they're going to overuse them. It's not good for the property. It's not good for your bills as well. So always try to split the utilities with the tenant. And I think I spoke last time about RUBS, or ratio utility billing systems. So if there's one boiler and there's 2 units, it's hard to split. So what you can do is use that ratio utility billing system and then charge back the tenant for their square footage of their portion of the heat. It keeps them in mind about how to use the property and not overuse the utilities, and gives them some skin in the game. So that's why I like to do that ratio utility billing system where I can't charge the tenant directly for the utility. Snow and lawn care, that's a very important one to include in the lease. So for all my leases, I do a rent reduction and I have the tenant do the snow and the lawn. I cannot tell you how expensive it is to have a third party do snow and lawn, especially now with labor shortages. I mean, they'll charge you $50 to $100 a time to go snowplow a driveway. And so I make my management company. I've had some debates with my management company about it. But I'm like, that's an absolute no for me, because it's just too expensive. I said, I don't care if they don't do it. And if they don't do it and something happens, then it's their own fault. But it's just too expensive. So I always give one, if it's a duplex, I'll make sure one of the units signs an addendum saying there's a rent reduction for you to do the snow and the lawn. And if no one will do it, they don't rent my property. That's how I feel about it. It's way too expensive. And the last thing on the lease is just discuss occupancy. You don't want to have a 3-bedroom home and 12 people living there. So you want to be very clear about how many people are actually living in the house. Typically, it's 2 per bedroom. So I always just put a caveat in the lease on that. So that's really it about leases. There's a lot more to go over, but this is just some of the highlights that I wanted to touch on. And then lastly, I wanted to cover a couple of tips that I've seen over the years to help you become a better property manager. And number one, I alluded to this earlier, is this is a business, not a hobby. So treat it like such. You want to keep an eye on your properties. You want to constantly look at where there's ways to increase income, where there's ways to decrease expenses. Keep an eye on the tenants, check the properties, do the things, treat it as a business, because this is really a retirement plan. Move in and move out checklists. I never really did those, but my property management company does. And it's a great way to settle disputes. So when the tenant's moving in, to have a checklist for them to sign off on the condition of the property is important. Because I've seen a lot of times where they'll punch a hole through a wall, they'll wreck a door, break a window, and they'll say, oh, that was there when I got it. Oh, no, it wasn't. So it really helps with having the move in and the move out checklist. If there's a dispute with the deposit, you can actually have it recorded there. Next is enforcing the lease. This is one that I was pretty bad at. So if there's a late fee, charge it. Do not give any slack on it. Because what tenants are going to do, they're going to take advantage of you. So as soon as you say, okay, you're 6 days late, we're not going to charge you late fee. The next month, they'll be 10 days late. Then they'll be 21 days late. So you give them a little bit of rope and they will take advantage of it. So if there's other things going on in the property that, if there's drug use, if there's unoccupied, if there's people that are living there that shouldn't, you need to make sure that you enforce the rules. If there's smoking, if there's drug use, just pay attention to it, enforce the lease. And if you need to evict them, you need to do it. Having a standard set of policies that you follow. I know I spoke about that on kind of the rental application criteria, but it really makes things easier just to have systems in place. So if this happens, you do this. So if there's 6 days late, okay, I'm gonna do an eviction on the 8th day. So just systematize everything. It makes things go a lot easier. being responsive and quick to remedy issues. I think this is really important. So if a tenant calls you and says that, well, there's a little bit of a water leak in the window, take care of it, because little problems lead to big problems down the line. And the thing is, you don't want to be a slumlord either. You want to treat your tenants really well, because the most expensive part of landlording a lot of time is the turnover. So if you're not treating your tenants right, you're not doing the things you need to do to keep the property in shape, they're going to move out, and that's expensive, because you're going to have to, whether it be carpet or paint, you're going to have time to take time out of your day to lease it. So if the tenant has an issue, take care of it right away. Being organized is very important. Have systems that you use to track the rents, so you can kind of see how your business is doing. You can use QuickBooks, you can use Excel. There's a program that I use called AppFolio, but try to be organized, and it helps just kind of seeing where you are in the business, and then also it's easier for accounting purposes as well. Two more things I want to just touch on is the keep up with city regulations. So I know I spoke about this earlier, is things are changing really rapidly right now, especially in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so as a landlord, if you have properties in those cities, you really need to keep up to date. So what's rent control going to do? How do you have to look at rental applications? I mean, I can't base it on eviction history anymore. So you have to be aware of those things. There's a new one coming out. I'm not as familiar with this, called TOPA. I don't know if anybody's heard of that. So if you own a multifamily unit in Minneapolis, the tenant has the first right to buy that property. And so they can delay your closings for up to 90 days. And they also have the first right. So if they have an offer on it, the tenant has first right of refusal on those particular properties. I think they're over 4 units or something like that. But these are new things that are coming out that can impact how you navigate it as a landlord. So always look at city regulations, kind of see what's going on in the city to make sure you're compliant. And the last one is just check on your properties. Try to check on at least once or twice a year, for a couple of reasons. One is you want to make sure that the tenants are treating the property right. And then two, you want to look for any deferred maintenance, because a lot of times tenants don't report things that there might be an issue. If there's a slow water leak, maybe there's mold in the basement, they're not reporting it. You want to just check in on it. And then, let me add one other thing, because this is an experience that I had a couple of weeks ago, is you want to make sure to write in your leases that if the tenant is leaving town, that they notify you. So I had a property, it was a college home in Duluth. They didn't tell my management company that they're leaving town, and the furnace went out, and it was radiant heat, and a bunch of the boiler or the radiators burst and then flooded part of the property. So that's one thing I would actually put back in the lease portion. If they're going to leave for an extended amount of time, they need to notify you, so you or the property manager, especially in really cold weather like we have right now, can check on the properties. So I think that's all I have for today, Shelby. So I don't know if anybody has any questions on that. I kind of went through everything a little quickly. So
Yeah, no, that was really, really helpful and good info. Does anyone have any questions for Tyler? Okay, so I have some questions for you.
yeah, of course.
All right. So I know that you're talking about, when you're looking at properties, you have your property managers there with you, just kind of educating you and a second eye of things. Well, just starting out, if someone like me does not have a property manager, how can I best educate myself for the things that a property manager looks for? Because I know that you managed a lot of your properties prior to that manager. So just wondering how to be the most effective or educate myself on that.
Well, one thing you can do is you can always ask a property manager what they look for too. Or what you can do is you can always preview competition. So you preview houses. You can maybe, if you see any open houses on Craigslist, maybe you're not renting there, but you can look what the competition is. So you can kind of see what rents and what doesn't. So, and then, just do your research. Look for the layout of the property. Tenants don't like to have small bedrooms. So you want to make sure to have decent bedroom sizes. Is there parking? Is there laundry? Some of those things that helps rent a property quickly. You want to make sure that your property has those items. I know parking is pretty big, laundry is pretty big. Bedrooms I know are obviously bigger bedrooms that people want to sleep in a closet. So some of the things that I found are beneficial that I know that I look for. But I would just maybe vet a random property manager, and like I can give you any of my property managers.
Okay.
You can call them, and they can just see what they look for. And maybe it changes by area too. So Minneapolis might have a little bit different criteria than Plymouth or Corcoran or St. Paul. So it's kind of area specific too. And I would just call a property manager.
Okay. Awesome. That's good. Does anyone else have any other questions? In your experience, how are you attracting like the most ideal tenants? I know that you're getting a lot of applications on Craigslist and Zillows, and you have certain criterias. But is there anything that you found to be more beneficial, versus looking for a tenant than the other? Like if it's whether, referral or within your network, just to find the most ideal tenant. 'Cause I feel like that's what most people are scared of is, what if I have one that's not great?
Yeah, that always happens, and all you can do is do your due diligence up front, because there's always going to be someone that falls through the crack. At least right now, you have a lot of options. I think there's a lot of people that are wanting to rent. So, I mean, the things I look for, certain areas creates different type of clientele. So, like in Northeast, it's pretty easy. I always get somebody that has very good credit. They have a W-2 employment, they have impeccable references. So, I mean, if you have somebody that has like a 750, 800 credit score, they have a W-2 job, and they have great credit references, I think you're going to be good.
Okay. Yep.
So in this market too, I think you have a lot more, because a lot more people are looking to rent. So you have options.
Okay.
But and then again, the better that you keep your property, the better shape that it's in. If I was talking to my property manager yesterday, appliances are a big thing. So having updated, stainless steel appliances, tenants like that. Maybe have the hardwood floor instead of carpet. Things that you can do to make your property more attractive is going to attract better tenants as well.
Okay. Yep. That totally makes sense. I think that's all that I have on my end for questions, but it's a lot of helpful tips. Does anyone else have anything or good? All right.
Okay.
Well, perfect. This was super helpful, Tyler. Thank you so much for your time.
For sure.
Again, our final series will be part 4. Add it to your calendar. It's Thursday, February 3rd at noon, and that will be how to maximize value and minimize your issues. So thanks, Tyler. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, Shelby.